Storytelling is important in business just like it's important in real life. Story is important because it's how we make sense of the world around us. Storytelling is essential. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Every single human being constructs their entire world with story. Stories resonate with us. Without story, we can't communicate and we can't understand. Even a loving embrace and a hug that gives you a deep, warm feeling is giving you a deep, warm feeling because you're putting that into a story in your mind about what that means to you. Stories connect in a way unlike any other information. You will communicate in a way that people not only understand, but care about. A data sheet or a PowerPoint presentation that isn't fueled by story is nothing to care about. A great story affects you. A great story affects you. A storyteller will know that their message is connecting with an audience because that audience will lean in. And when people lean in, they want to know more, they want to engage, and they want to act. Storytelling is important in business just like it's important in real life. Stories are literally the bridge between people. The bridge between people. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are literally the bridge. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about harnessing the power of storytelling for problem solving. Problem solving? Really? Isn't storytelling all about communication? Well, problem solving and storytelling is all about effectively solving problems, establishing strong relationships with customers and clients, and ultimately finding ways to break problems down and solve them with storytelling. And you might have tried to dig into storytelling in business and explored it. And if you did, you probably came across stuff like the following, right? Do you recognize these? Hero's Journey, Pixar's Tips. This stuff is not only a little bit on the complicated and confusing side if you don't spend all your time focusing on storytelling, because, for example, doing your job or running your business, but they're also not really useful in business unless your entire role, like mine was 10 years ago at Microsoft as chief storyteller for Microsoft Dynamics, just focusing on storytelling, which is what I started going down the rabbit hole on all of this stuff. And why did we want to do it? We wanted to tell better stories, right? And through that experience of getting better at telling business stories and figuring out how to help you tell better business stories, I've also learned that the act of figuring out what the story is an act of problem solving itself. And so that's what we're really going to be focusing on in this little chat in the blog that goes along with it. And that is ultimately, whether you realize it or not, storytelling is a tremendous part of our everyday lives. We're always putting ourselves at the center of our story. We're always trying to predict what other people are going to do based on what our prediction is for their story. That's all about something, by the way, that's called theory of mind. It's a really fascinating topic. We also use storytelling to make sense of the world around us and then to obviously communicate and interact with other people. And when it's used correctly, storytelling can also be a powerful problem-solving tool. And in business, that's super important because what is business about? It's about finding a better way to do something and packaging that up in something that people can buy, right? And it's ultimately about real world scenarios, right? You're not going to sell a product or a service that doesn't solve some real world scenario. So if you make that effort to go through thinking about problems from a story perspective, then it's going to really help with that. And in fact, real world, another word for that, one of my favorites is outside in. It's not far from the idea of not being able to see the forest for the trees. Ultimately, we're all experts in our own business, right? And the process of expertise creates something that Chip and Dan Heath characterized as the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is an inside out mindset. And so an outside in mindset is putting the customer at the center of your thinking, putting those real world problems at the center of your thinking, and ultimately becomes a tool that can help you work backwards to turn that situation into a story, to help you understand the situation, the problem better, help you communicate that to your colleagues better, and then ultimately solve the problem in a way that is already marching towards great storytelling when you eventually get to a place where you're telling or you're communicating. And really the telling, even the word storytelling, it bothers me. It's the act of telling, of course, telling, talking, spewing information from one's mouth is a thing, right? And if you tell a story, kind of technically you're doing that. But the thing that bothers me about it is that the beauty of storytelling, it's not telling, it's not describing, it's showing. It's going through an experience and surfacing the emotions and the reactions that you have hearing that story, and therefore getting you to embrace and understand that. I literally was using storytelling with my 9-year-old last night, talking about friendships and giving people second chances and the golden rule. And as a part of that, the most effective part of my conversation with him was telling stories about my own life, my authentic stories that helped him really see that from a different perspective, because he was living the story in his head as I told him it. And showing and communicating life's complexities is much more enjoyable, quite frankly, when we hear it in a story than having a bullet list read off to us. And so doing this, taking this approach is going to help you get a better understanding of your customers, their needs based on what problems exist, communicating the ideas that are complex and in a simple way. Like I said, that starts with you and your colleagues. Quite frankly, it starts with in our own brain, so breaking down the problem so we can understand it. If we can't understand it, we can't start solving it, right? Next step, colleagues. Then the next step out from that, partners, and then eventually your clients or customers. And of course, then when you get to any of those steps with another human being, is building rapport and establishing that trust, which we need to do with our colleagues and we need to do with our customers. To be honest, we need to do it with ourselves. We don't trust our own ideas. Are we going to be confident in marching forward with them? Probably not, right? So typically, when you think about solving a problem, building a product, coming up with a new business idea, it begins with the potential problem of a potential customer, right? Their pains, their wants, their desires, and their needs for a solution that ultimately solves those needs. And you can have a complicated framework for storytelling, right? We showed those. If we pop those back up here again, you could have that, or you could have something that's a little bit clearer, simpler, and based on what I like to call the iceberg approach, which is start with a tippy top that makes sense, is clear what it is, it's an iceberg, and then you go deeper and you understand the full breadth and depth of it. So the 3D framework is very much designed to do that. So if you think about a time that you've we're trying to do break a problem down, right? And you think about this, right? This 3D framework: desire, difficulty, denouement. So desire, what did you want, or did your customer want, or a potential customer? What do they want? What stands in the way of them getting that? And then ultimately, how could that not be untangled? Run that thought experiment, as Einstein used to say. And I love the idea of thought experiments. I just put ourselves in that story and explore it, right? And so this tool gives you that opportunity to do that. Take a moment and think about the last customer service call you had to make. I've had several recently. Maybe you were on the phone with an agent. Okay, maybe you started on Twitter, or maybe you went to a chat bot, but eventually you got to somebody on the phone. Did they appear to care? Did they listen to your story? They probably were probing on what was wrong, right? That's a big part of their job. Did they ask about the why? Did they seek to understand why this was important to you? Did they even appear to be empathizing or listening to why this is a problem for you? Generally, when we have to get to the point of speaking to somebody on the phone, it's pushing the envelope on our experience. We're frustrated. We want to solve it. This is standing in our way. It is a difficulty of us getting to whatever it is that we want. Often we've spent a lot of money on the thing that we're calling to get help on, right? I recently faced this exact issue when dealing with the automotive company Audi, which I used to be a massive fan of, so much so, even going to Le Mans 24-hour race at the turn of the century when the R8 first came out, and seeing the R8 dominate through the night at the 24-hour race. I was a big fan. We'd had many Audis in our family, and I was an influencer, quite frankly, to my friends and family, extended family, who also then would buy Audis. We bought an Audi e-tron back in 2019, and for 2 years I literally logged 100 issues with that car. Often those issues repeated as well, but 100 issues that cropped up. 6 or 7 trips, I can't remember how many, was somewhere in that region, to the dealer for bug squashing because they weren't doing over-the-air updates like Tesla or Ford do. In one incident was so severe that my wife was actually stranded in a dark and abandoned at that time of night car park in the middle of the night. She was helping with a school function in a college car park, and it was late, and she went to go back to the car to leave, and the car's charging cable wouldn't release, and she ended up having to get a ride back home. I was back home with the kids, with little kids, right? So you can hear that, you can feel this story, you can feel the frustration that my wife was going through, that I was going through. And it was an owner's nightmare. And Audi seemed to fail to understand how big a role that played in my story and my feelings around the brand, and quite frankly, the damage that story was doing to the perception of the Audi brand in my mind. And I share that story. I'm sharing it with you now. Stories are viral. I mean, how are you going to feel about buying an Audi with the thought that your loved ones could be stranded in a car park in the middle of the night, right? That effect spreads, and you may well even tell that story to somebody else, right? And that's what the viral aspect. If anything, stories are the original viral messaging. So looking at this example, it's clear that solving problems in business requires listening to the stories of customers experiencing issues. And by listening and understanding and respecting those stories, we as a business can then do something about it. In some ways, you could say the customer's always right. I don't know if that's always true, quite frankly, but the customer needs to be respected. And the best way to respect a customer is to listen to their story and to understand the why of the frustration that they're experiencing. And while our 3D framework is super simple and a great way to approach storytelling, you've probably also come across my 5 best friends and how: who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? Often cited as the elements of breaking down and explaining or exploring a problem. They're also key components of effective and engaging storytelling, right? Who was the story happening to? What was happening in the story? When did it happen? If what was a bad thing, what point, when did that thing happen? Where did it happen? What's the context, the environment? Why did it happen? And how did it happen? So that story of my wife being stranded, it was the who was my wife, was me, the children at home. What happened? The charging cable wouldn't come out of the car. Guess what? You can't get the charging cable out of an electric car. You can't drive it anywhere, right? When did it happen? It was late. It was dark. It was the middle of the night. to all intents and purposes. Where was it? In an abandoned car park, for goodness sake. Does that paint a pretty picture? Why was it happening? We had no idea, right? But the why of my wife was, I need to get into my car so I can be safe and get back home to my family. And how did she approach it? Well, she had to call a lift to get taken home. And we then had to contact Audi and go back the next day and go through a whole process and eventually figure out how to get this thing unplugged. Absolute nightmare, as you can imagine. So who, what, when, why, where, and how are often cited as being really useful, right? So for example, let's say you're launching some new software that's designed to help a business manage their finances, right? You could break down the information of the potential problems into small stories that reveal, not just explain, how the software works and what it can do for those who use it. I will tell you, by the way, that there is an emergency release buried within most electric cars somewhere where you can actually yank it and result in getting that charging cable out, right? And so that you're more likely to remember that now than just being told it. And by the way, it's not just pulling the cable out itself. If you do that, you could actually break it, I believe. So you could telling and showing a story about this business owner with this finance software is another way to approach it. Maybe they were struggling to keep track of their expenses or the complexity of their expenses, or how the software helped them to get their finances under control. There's lots of stories you could tell here, and our friends when, who, and where will easily be understood as you continue in this direction. I would suggest pondering questions like, when did this happen? Who is involved? Where did this happen? A sprinkle of context will go a long way. Like salt, though, don't overuse your context. You spend too much time on context and you bore people and you lose their attention, and if you lose somebody's attention, you're not ever going to be heard, right? Get attention, be heard, and sell more. So before long, you'll start to see how the 3D framework is just as easy to remember. In fact, it's a bit easier because it's only 3 things, and it'll help you keep those 6 pals focused on getting you to a story. The desire, right? So what is desire? Desire includes the who, right? And the why, and some of the what, right? In terms of what they wanted, but the why, the motivator behind this. And then the difficulty, there's the what was standing in the way, and how was that affecting the individual in your story that's at the center of the story, your customer, for example. And the denouement, which is a fancy French word which stands for the untangling of the knot, the approach that was used. How did they approach this? What product did they use as a part of it, or service? It's where you slip in your company, and what were the outcomes as well? What did they learn, and why does that matter? And so you can see how those tools, the 6 best friends, can be useful from a storytelling perspective, but you also need to think about it in this flow of somebody wanting something, discovering something's in the way, and ultimately how they untangled that. How we untangled this was we got rid of the car and no longer customers of Audi, right? And even though we had to replace that electric car with another electric car, we didn't go with the Audi brand. And so that ultimately is the outcome of your story. And so you can see how these things work together. Problem solving, storytelling, a match made in heaven. Make sure that you're thinking about your customers' stories. Use storytelling or story as a way to break down your customer's problem. You can do that early on as a product development, as you're exploring products. You can do it to communicate internally about the features or the products that you're developing. You can do it with your sales teams and your partners to communicate the importance of why this product helps somebody. And then ultimately you eventually get to the place of telling those stories and showing your customers what's possible. And by including storytelling at every step along the way, from the problem solving all the way through, you're building that muscle, you're building that story momentum, and you're ultimately going to get to a place where you're going to be able to leverage the power of storytelling to solve the problems and communicate more effectively. Now, The 3D framework is also a part of something that we like to call the Storytelling for Action playbook, the Storytelling for Action kit. And this includes not just the 3D framework, but a couple of other key frameworks, the Story Meet methodology and the Trip storytelling methodology. So the 3D story framework to help you tell stories or even break problems down, right? The Story Meet method enables you to then make sure you're bringing the right emotions and feelings into those stories. And the Trip storytelling methodology helps you build that big picture story, that strategic narrative that all your stories will align to, and then align to each other, align to a business, create strong alignment that goes all the way through to the stories you're telling. And so all these things ultimately are included within the Storytelling for Action playbook. Super exciting. You can actually sign up to be the first to hear about when our program goes live. And the book is actually going live right at virtually as we speak. The ebook is actually already up online. And let's actually see Storytelling for Action. See if the print version's been approved by Amazon yet, and it's not quite. So you can get the Kindle version. I would actually really encourage you to get a copy, a paper copy, because it's a workbook. You sit down, get away from the computer screen, rest those eyes, and work on building your stories. So, but you can get updates on all of this by going to gonarrative.com/storytelling for action. And as a bonus, you'll also get our weekly storytelling tips and announcements of the various frameworks that we launch and the blogs and all of that good stuff. So any questions that anybody has, always love to field questions. Let's go have a look and see if we got any in the chat here right now. If Matthew can find the actual chat button, there we go. Okay, so we talked about stories, but we didn't talk about heroes. Why is that? Well, a big part of what we espouse at Go Narrative is that storytelling isn't reserved for entertainment. Storytelling isn't just about the hero's journey and Hollywood. Those are byproducts. They're artifacts of what story is. And storytelling is actually really going on in here, how we see the world, how we solve the problems, how we then communicate with those. And the fact it's so effective at getting attention and having us be heard, an industry formed out of it, an entertainment industry going back millennia, right? Started telling stories around the campfires, eventually verbal stories, written stories, and all the way to the crazy, amazing movies that we have nowadays. But that's a whole industry in of itself. You can use storytelling in business, and you don't need to think about things like heroes or the hero's journey or story arcs, right? These types of things are interesting if you want to geek out on storytelling. Obviously, that's something that I've spent a lot of time doing, but you don't need to look there for help telling stories in business or using storytelling in business to do things like solving problems. So great question there. And that looks like it for now, and that's absolutely fine. You can reach out to us at gnhelp@gonarrative.com, and you can sign up for Storytelling for Action at gonarrative.com/storytelling. And we are super excited to get that Storytelling for Action playbook into your hands. I think you're going to find it really useful. We use it with our coaching clients. We use it with our workshopping, with our corporate and the medium, large size businesses that we work with. We use it with everyone, and you can use it too. And we've designed it to package as much of that up as possible to help you get going with storytelling on your own as quickly, easily, and financially as accessible as possible. So Storytelling for Action is available at gonarrative.com/SFA. Super excited for you to hear more about it. And let us know if you have any questions. And as always, we'll be back this time next week to do another stream and answer any of your questions. Have an absolutely wonderful day and happy storytelling.